Kethavar never thought he would die on such a small world. The human colony on Kepler 442b looked peaceful from space, with its tiny mining stations and research buildings scattered across the brown surface like toys. His reconnaissance ship had been scanning the planet for 3 days, counting defenses and mapping weak points for the main Zephyrian fleet. The humans had no idea what was coming. The attack began at dawn. Zephyrian warships dropped from hyperspace like falling stars, their energy weapons painting the dark sky blue and white. The human defense stations fired back with primitive missiles and plasma cannons, but they might as well have been throwing rocks. Kethavar watched from his ship as the first wave of Marines landed near the main settlement. This would be over in hours. Then something went wrong. Kethavar's ship shuddered as human fighters swarmed around it like angry insects. These were not the slow, clumsy vessels he had seen in the intelligence reports. They moved fast and worked together in ways that made his scanner operators curse in frustration. When the first missile hit his shields, Kethavar knew he was in trouble. "Sir, they are using our own frequency modulations against us," his communications officer reported, his voice tight with worry. "They have learned to disrupt our shield harmonics. That was impossible." The humans had only been fighting Zephyrians for 6 hours. No species could adapt their technology that quickly, but as more missiles slammed into his ship, each one tuned perfectly to penetrate their defenses, Kethavar realized the impossible was happening. His ship crashed in the rocky hills outside the human settlement. Half his crew died in the impact, and the other half were too injured to fight when the humans found them. Kethavar had expected to be taken to some kind of military facility for questioning. Instead, the humans dragged him and his surviving crew to what looked like a mining warehouse. Captain Jake Morrison was not what Kethavar expected from a human commander. The man was short and thick, with gray hair and tired eyes that seemed to see everything. He wore a simple uniform with no decorations, and he spoke in a calm voice that somehow made everything he said sound like a threat. "I know you can understand me," Morrison said, standing in front of Kethavar's holding cell. "Your translator implant is still working, so let me make this simple. Your people attacked my world without warning. They killed 300 civilians in the first hour. Children, families, people who never held a weapon in their lives." Kethavar said nothing. According to Zephyrian military law, prisoners were required to give only their name and rank. He had memorized these rules since he was a young soldier. Morrison seemed to read his thoughts. "You think this is going to be like your warrior stories, don't you? Honor and respect between soldiers, maybe some noble speeches about duty." The human smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "This isn't that kind of war." Lieutenant Amy Chen appeared at Morrison's shoulder holding a data pad. She was young for an officer, with dark hair pulled back and intelligent eyes that reminded Kethavar of his own daughter. But when she spoke, her voice was cold as space. "Captain, the engineering teams have finished their preliminary examination of the crash site," she reported. "They think they can reverse engineer the shield generators within 72 hours. The weapon systems will take longer, maybe a week." Kethavar felt his blood turn to ice. Reverse engineering Zephyrian technology should take months, even for a species as advanced as his own. These humans were talking about doing it in days. "What about the survivors?" Morrison asked. "Dr. Walsh wants to run some tests," Chen replied. "Nothing harmful, just scans and blood samples. He says understanding their biology might help us develop better interrogation techniques." Morrison nodded. "Make it happen. And Chen? Make sure our guest here gets a front row seat. I want him to see exactly what kind of people he's dealing with." Over the next 2 days, Kethavar watched the humans work with growing horror. They tore apart his ship like scavengers, studying every circuit and power coupling with an intensity that bordered on madness. Teams of engineers and scientists swarmed over the wreckage, taking notes and arguing about theories in voices loud enough for him to hear. Dr. Peter Walsh was a thin man with nervous hands who seemed to find everything about Zephyrian physiology fascinating. He ran endless tests on Kethavar's injured crew members, always explaining that he was just trying to help them heal faster. But Kethavar noticed how Walsh wrote down every reaction, every weakness, every detail about how Zephyrian bodies worked. "Remarkable," Walsh muttered during one session, studying a blood sample under his microscope. "Your cellular structure is much more efficient than ours, but that efficiency creates vulnerabilities we could exploit." Fascinating. The worst part was how quickly the humans learned. Every day, Kethavar saw them testing new weapons and defenses based on what they had stolen from his ship. Their crude technology began incorporating Zephyrian principles, creating hybrid systems that should not have been possible. When the human engineers activated a working shield generator built from salvaged parts, Kethvar knew his people were in serious trouble. But it was not just the technology that worried him. It was the way the humans thought about war. They had no concept of honor or fair fighting. When Morrison's communications officer intercepted a Zephyrian patrol signal, the humans immediately began broadcasting false distress calls, trying to lure more ships into traps. They studied Zephyrian military protocols not to understand their enemy, but to turn those protocols into weapons. "Your people follow rules," Morrison explained during one of their daily conversations. "Rules about how to fight, how to treat prisoners, how to conduct a proper war. That's admirable in a way, but it also makes you predictable." Kethvar finally spoke. "And humans have no rules at all?" Morrison's smile was thin. "Oh, we have rules. Lots of them. But when someone threatens our homes, our families, our very existence, we tend to get creative about which rules still apply." On his third night in captivity, Kethvar began making recordings on his personal data device, which the humans had not bothered to take away from him. They seemed to think it was just a simple medical monitor. He documented everything he saw, the casual cruelty, the efficient brutality, the way human soldiers spoke about Zephyrian prisoners like they were insects to be studied and disposed of. These recordings would be his gift to the Empire, proof that humans were monsters who deserved no mercy. The Zephyrian people would see what their enemies truly were, and they would fight harder knowing that surrender meant torture and death. But as he made his notes that night, watching human guards patrol the warehouse where his crew was being held, Kethvar could not shake the memory of Morrison's tired eyes. The human captain looked like a man who hated what he was doing, but was determined to do it anyway. That thought disturbed Kethvar more than all the cruelty he had witnessed. The Zephyrian reinforcement fleet arrived exactly when their battle plan said it would. Kethvar watched from his cell window as dozens of warships dropped from hyperspace, their hulls gleaming silver in the pale sunlight. He felt a surge of hope for the first time since his capture. The Empire had sent 3 full battle groups to crush this human colony. Surely Captain Morrison and his barbaric soldiers would surrender now. Morrison appeared at his cell an hour later, but the human did not look worried. If anything, he seemed almost pleased. "Impressive," Morrison said, looking up at the Zephyrian fleet through the same window. "Your commanders really do follow the book, don't they? Same formation your people have used for the last 200 years. Same approach pattern, same everything." "You cannot win," Kethvar said. "Those ships carry enough firepower to turn this planet into glass." Morrison smiled that cold smile again. "Maybe, but they have to find us first." Within minutes of the fleet's arrival, the human base began to disappear. Buildings collapsed into hidden underground chambers, defensive positions folded into the rocky terrain, and personnel vanished into tunnels and caves that seemed to appear from nowhere. What had looked like a standard military installation revealed itself to be an elaborate illusion built on top of a massive underground complex. "We had 3 days to prepare while you were unconscious," Lieutenant Amy Chen explained as she secured Kethvar's transport restraints. "Humans are very good at digging holes and hiding in them. We've had lots of practice." The Zephyrian fleet began orbital bombardment an hour later, turning the surface installations into smoking craters, but their thermal scanners found nothing. The humans had somehow masked their heat signatures so completely that the ships above might as well have been shooting at shadows. General Lisa Martinez arrived on the second day of the siege, brought down in a stealth transport that somehow slipped through the Zephyrian blockade. She was a small woman with iron-gray hair and hands that never stopped moving. And when she spoke, even Captain Morrison listened carefully. "Status report," she demanded, walking into the command bunker like she owned the place. "We've got them frustrated," Morrison replied. "They're burning through their ordnance trying to find us, and their patrol patterns are getting sloppy." "I think we can start phase 2, Martinez nodded. "Do it, and Captain? No prisoners from here on out. We can't afford the resources, and I don't want them learning our tactics." Kethvar felt sick. He had been making recordings of human cruelty for 5 days, but this was different. This was not torture or interrogation. This was simple murder dressed up as military necessity. The human counterattack began that night. Small teams of soldiers emerged from hidden tunnels behind Zephyrian landing parties, hitting supply convoys and communication outposts with brutal efficiency. But what shocked Kethvar was not the attacks themselves, but how the humans fought. Sergeant Dan Brooks was Kethvar's primary guard, a thick-shouldered man with scarred hands who spoke very little. But Kethvar had learned to read human expressions. and he could see that Brooks was troubled by what he was being asked to do. Picked up 6 wounded Zephyrians from the fuel depot raid, Brooks reported to Morrison after one mission. What do you want me to do with them? Morrison did not even look up from his tactical display. Same as always. We don't have medical supplies to waste on enemy wounded. Brooks nodded and walked away, but Kethover saw his hands shake as he loaded his sidearm. 20 minutes later, 6 plasma shots echoed through the underground complex. But the humans were not just killing prisoners. They were using them as tools. During a rescue operation to recover a crashed human pilot, Kethover watched in horror as Commander Alex Turner's Special Forces team dragged 3 Zephyrian captives to the front of their formation. "Move forward," Turner ordered the prisoners in broken Zephyrian. "Your people will not shoot through you to get to us." It worked. The Zephyrian rescue team held their fire rather than risk hitting their own soldiers, giving the humans time to reach their fallen pilot and extract him safely. The 3 prisoners were left behind with broken legs, unable to walk, but alive enough to slow down any pursuit. Turner's tactics were becoming legendary among the human forces. He had studied every Zephyrian military manual his people had captured, looking not for strengths but for exploitable weaknesses. When he discovered that Zephyrian soldiers would always attempt to rescue wounded comrades, Turner began leaving booby traps on his own casualties. "It's not personal," Turner explained to his team during a briefing that Kethover was forced to attend. "They're predictable. They follow protocols even when those protocols get them killed. We can use that." The psychological warfare was even worse than the physical brutality. General Martinez had authorized the broadcast of fake surrender signals, designed to lure Zephyrian ships into carefully prepared kill zones. When Captain Morrison objected that this violated interstellar law, Martinez's response was simple. "They started this war by bombing civilians," she said. "Everything that happens after that is on them." The humans began targeting civilian support vessels, something no honorable military force would ever consider. Medical ships, supply transports, even the small courier vessels that carried mail between the fleet and the home worlds, all became legitimate targets in human eyes. "They're not military," Kethover protested when he saw the targeting list. "Those ships carry no weapons. They carry food, medicine, and ammunition to the people trying to kill us," Morrison replied. "That makes them combatants." Dr. Walsh had begun more intensive studies of the captured Zephyrians, always under the pretense of medical care. But Kethover could see the real purpose in the doctor's excited notes. Walsh was mapping Zephyrian biology, looking for pressure points and vulnerabilities that could be exploited. "Your nervous system is fascinating," Walsh explained during one session, showing Kethover a detailed scan of a Zephyrian brain, much more centralized than human neurology. That creates some interesting possibilities for interrogation enhancement. The worst moment came when Kethover was allowed to witness what the humans called a medical procedure. One of his crew, a young communications officer named Vethmar, had been injured in the crash and was receiving what appeared to be excellent care from a human medic named Kelly Foster. Foster was gentle and professional, explaining each treatment and making sure Vethmar was comfortable. She saved his life with her skill and dedication, but 30 minutes later Kethover watched the same medic inject something into Vethmar's IV line while he slept. "He won't suffer," Foster said quietly when she noticed Kethover watching, but he overheard too much during the command briefings. "We can't risk him reporting our defensive positions if he's exchanged in a prisoner swap." Vethmar died in his sleep 20 minutes later, and the official medical report listed heart failure as the cause of death. That night, Kethover made his longest recording yet, documenting every human atrocity he had witnessed. These people fought without honor, tortured without shame, and killed without mercy. They were monsters wearing the faces of a civilized species. But as he spoke into his hidden recorder, Kethover found himself remembering strange moments of contradiction. Kelly Foster crying silently after she killed Vethmar, Sergeant Brooks drinking heavily every night after executing prisoners, Commander Turner's hands shaking after his latest successful ambush. The humans seemed to hate what they were doing almost as much as Kethover did. But they kept doing it anyway, as if they had made some terrible decision that could not be unmade. Intercepted communications from the Zephyrian fleet confirmed what Kethover already knew. His people were losing this fight not because the humans were stronger, but because they were willing to abandon every principle of civilized warfare. "These humans fight like animals," one fleet commander reported to the Empire. "They use tactics we would never consider, Strategies that violate every law of war we know. How do we fight an enemy that has no limits? That was the question that kept Kethvar awake at night. How indeed? Dr. Rachel Stone arrived at the human base 3 weeks after the siege began, and Kethvar knew immediately that his situation had become much worse. Stone was a thin woman with pale skin and dark eyes that seemed to look right through people. She called herself a psychologist, but the way she studied Kethvar made him feel like a specimen in a laboratory. Traditional interrogation methods are ineffective on Zephyrian subjects. Stone explained to General Martinez during a briefing that Kethvar was forced to attend. Their military conditioning includes resistance to physical torture and standard psychological pressure techniques. But everyone has breaking points. We just need to find the right leverage. Stone had brought equipment that looked more like medical devices than torture instruments. Brain scanners, chemical analyzers, devices that could monitor heart rate and stress hormones in real time. She set up her operation in a clean white room that smelled of antiseptic and fear. "I want you to understand something," Stone said during their first session. "I'm not here to hurt you for fun. I have a job to do and I'm very good at it. Your cooperation will make this easier for both of us." Kethvar said nothing. Stone smiled and activated one of her machines. The psychological torture began slowly. Stone had studied Zephyrian culture and religion with the same intensity that Dr. Walsh studied their biology. She knew exactly which beliefs and traditions would cause the most pain when twisted and defiled. "Your people believe in the sacred bond between warriors, don't they?" Stone asked during one session. "The idea that soldiers who fight together are connected by something deeper than friendship. That their spirits are linked even after death." She showed him video footage of his crew members being dissected in Dr. Walsh's laboratory, their bodies cut apart, while human scientists took notes and made jokes. She had edited the recordings to make it look like his people were still alive and conscious during the procedures. "Your connection to them means you feel their pain," Stone explained as Kethvar struggled against his restraints. "Every cut, every violation, every moment of their suffering flows through that sacred bond directly into your mind." It was not true. The sacred bond was a metaphor, not a literal connection. But Stone's lies were so detailed, so convincing, that part of Kethvar began to believe them. The human psychologist had found a way to turn his own faith against him. Major Chris Evans had been different when Kethvar first met him. The human officer was young and idealistic, someone who still believed that wars could be fought with honor and dignity. But 3 weeks of brutal fighting had changed him into something harder and more dangerous. "I used to think there were rules," Evans told Kethvar during one of his visits. "Lines you didn't cross, things you didn't do to other people, no matter what they had done to you. But your people killed my entire unit last week. 37 soldiers under my command, most of them barely 20 years old." Evans showed him pictures of the human dead, their bodies torn apart by Zephyrian energy weapons. Some of them looked younger than Kethvar's own son. "They were good kids," Evans continued. "They followed orders, they trusted their officers, and they died because I was too worried about fighting fair to use every weapon at my disposal. That won't happen again." Evans had become one of Stone's most enthusiastic supporters, volunteering for missions that other officers found too disturbing to carry out. When a transport full of Zephyrian civilians was captured trying to evacuate from the combat zone, Evans personally supervised their interrogation. "They're not soldiers," Lieutenant Amy Chen protested. "They're just families trying to get away from the fighting." "They're intelligence assets," Evans replied coldly. "They've seen our positions, our troop movements, our defensive capabilities. We can't let that information reach the enemy fleet." The civilian interrogations were worse than anything done to military prisoners. Stone used children as leverage against their parents, threatening family members who were not even present, creating elaborate lies about what would happen to loved ones if cooperation was not forthcoming. Kethvar watched a Zephyrian mother break down completely when Stone showed her fake video of her daughter being tortured in another facility. The woman told the humans everything she knew about Zephyrian fleet movements, civilian evacuation routes, even the locations of hidden supply caches that could be used by resistance fighters. "She's lying about the daughter," Dr. Walsh told Stone after the session. "Medical scans confirm that the subject has never given birth." "The supposed child doesn't exist," Stone nodded calmly. "I know, but the maternal instinct is still there even without an actual child to protect. Fear for theoretical offspring can be just as motivating as fear for real ones." The humans had begun developing weapons specifically designed to target Zephyrian biology. Dr. Walsh's research had identified several vulnerabilities in their cellular structure, and human scientists were working around the clock to create biological agents that would exploit these weaknesses. It's not technically a violation of the Biological Weapons Treaty, Walsh explained to General Martinez. The restrictions only apply to weapons that target Earth-based life forms. Since Zephyrians evolved on a different world with different biochemistry, the treaty doesn't cover them. Kethavar had been forced to provide tissue samples for these experiments, watching as human scientists tested various compounds on living Zephyrian cells. The results were horrifying. Some agents caused rapid cellular breakdown that would kill within hours. Others created slower reactions that would incapacitate victims for weeks while their bodies slowly destroyed themselves from within. But it was not just the development of these weapons that disturbed Kethavar. It was the casual way the humans discussed using them. They talked about genocide like it was a tactical decision, debating the merits of different delivery systems as if they were planning a training exercise. Atmospheric deployment would be most effective, one scientist suggested. We could sterilize entire continents in a matter of days. Too indiscriminate, General Martinez replied. We want to maintain the infrastructure for post-war occupation. Targeted deployment through water supplies would be more precise. The worst revelation came when Kethavar discovered that another member of his crew was still alive. Zethmir had been his communications officer and close friend for 15 years. The human records listed him as dead, killed in the crash, but Kethavar caught a glimpse of him being moved between holding areas. When he demanded to see Zethmir, Dr. Stone smiled that cold smile and agreed immediately. Of course, she said, I think a reunion would be very therapeutic for both of you. They brought Zethmir to the interrogation room in restraints, his body covered with surgical scars and monitoring devices. His friend looked up at Kethavar with eyes that no longer held any sanity. They cut into my mind, Zethmir whispered. They put things inside my head, machines that let them see my thoughts. I can't make them stop. Stone activated a control device and Zethmir began screaming. The sounds coming from him were not entirely natural. Electronic interference mixed with biological pain in ways that hurt to hear. We've been experimenting with neural interface technology, Stone explained casually. Your friend has been very helpful in our research. Every time you refuse to cooperate, we test a new procedure on him. So far, we've mapped about 60% of the Zephyrian brain structure. Kethavar broke. He told them everything he knew about fleet deployments, defensive strategies, intelligence protocols, and communication codes. He gave them information that would get thousands of his people killed, just to make the screaming stop. But when the session ended and they were taking Zethmir away, Stone activated her control device one more time. Zethmir convulsed and died, his artificially enhanced nervous system finally overloading from the strain. He was always going to die, Stone explained to Kethavar's shocked expression. The neural implants are too invasive to be survivable long-term, but thank you for the information. It will save many human lives. That night, Kethavar made the longest recording of his captivity, documenting every detail of human cruelty he had witnessed. These people were not just fighting a war, they were enjoying it. They had become monsters so complete that they made even their own allies sick with revulsion. Several human officers had begun showing signs of severe psychological trauma. Sergeant Brooks had started drinking heavily and talking to himself during guard duty. Dr. Walsh had begun taking medication for anxiety and depression. Even General Martinez looked haggard and worn, as if the weight of her decisions was slowly crushing her. But they kept making those decisions anyway, ordering new atrocities every day as if they had no choice in the matter. Lieutenant Tony Clark was one of the few humans who seemed disturbed by what his people were doing. He was young and idealistic, someone who still believed in concepts like honor and mercy, when he thought no one was watching. Kethavar had seen him crying after particularly brutal interrogation sessions. This isn't what I signed up for, Clark told another officer during a conversation he thought was private. I joined the military to protect people, not to become a war criminal. None of us signed up for this, came the reply. But it's what we have to do to win. That phrase had become a mantra among the human forces. Admiral Grace Parker arrived with the human reinforcement fleet on a cold morning when the artificial lights in Kethavar's cell flickered like dying stars. She was an older woman with silver hair and steady hands, someone who carried herself like she had seen every kind of horror the universe could offer. When she walked into the command center, even General Martinez straightened her shoulders and paid attention. Status report, Parker demanded, her voice carrying the authority of decades in space warfare. We've been holding position for 6 weeks, Martinez replied. The Zephyrian fleet is getting desperate. They're low on supplies and their morale is breaking. I estimate another month before they withdraw completely. Parker nodded, reviewing the tactical displays with cold efficiency. And our special projects? Dr. Stone's psychological operations have been very successful. We've broken most of their command structure and identified key weaknesses in their military doctrine. Dr. Walsh has completed development of several biological weapons that could end this war in days. Show me, Parker said. What followed was a briefing that made even Kethvar's previous experiences seem mild. Parker reviewed footage of human war crimes with the same expression she might use to examine supply reports. She watched recordings of torture sessions, biological weapon tests, and mass executions without showing any emotion at all. Effective, she said finally, but not efficient. We're wasting too many resources on individual prisoners when we could be targeting their entire population. Centers. Lieutenant Tony Clark had been given access to the base's historical archives as part of his intelligence duties, and he had made a discovery that changed everything Kethvar thought he knew about humans. Late one night, when the guards were distracted by a supply convoy arrival, Clark slipped into Kethvar's cell with a data pad. You need to see this, Clark whispered, activating the device. You think we're monsters, but you don't understand what we really are. The files contained records of human history going back thousands of years, wars that had consumed entire continents, genocides that had killed millions, weapons that could destroy whole cities in seconds, but more than that, they contained records of humans doing these things to other humans. We've been at war with ourselves longer than your people have existed, Clark explained. We know what it looks like when civilization breaks down, because we've done it to ourselves dozens of times. The things we're doing to your people? We learned them by doing them to each other. Kethvar stared at images of human cities burning, human soldiers executing human civilians, human scientists testing biological weapons on human subjects. The capacity for cruelty he had witnessed was not something the humans had developed for fighting aliens. It was something they had perfected through millennia of fighting themselves. But we also know what comes after, Clark continued, showing him different files. We know how to rebuild. We know how to forgive. We know how to make sure it doesn't happen again, at least for a while. There were records of human war crimes tribunals, where victorious armies had put their own officers on trial for atrocities committed during battle. There were peace treaties that included provisions for war reparations and cultural exchange programs. There were monuments built to commemorate victims of human brutality, maintained by the same species that had created them. Why are you showing me this? Kethvar asked. Clark's young face was full of pain and confusion. Because I need someone to know that we're not proud of what we're doing. Some of us hate it as much as you do, but we also know that if we lose this war, your people will do the same things to us. Everyone becomes a monster when their survival is at stake. The next day brought news that changed the entire dynamic of the war. Zephyrian long-range communications had intercepted human military signals, discussing the deployment of planet-killer weapons against civilian population centers. Admiral Parker had authorized the use of humanity's most destructive weapons to end the war through mass genocide. But not everyone in the human command structure agreed with this decision. Professor Elena Rodriguez led a group of civilian scientists and junior officers who began documenting human war crimes with the same intensity that Kethvar had been using. They called themselves the Historical Record Project, and their goal was to ensure that future generations would know exactly what had been done in humanity's name. We can't stop what's happening, Rodriguez explained to her small group of followers during a meeting that Kethvar was allowed to observe. But we can make sure it's remembered. We can create a record that will prevent this from happening again. The internal conflict within human ranks was becoming impossible to ignore. Captain Morrison had begun questioning orders from his superiors, refusing to carry out certain missions that he considered unnecessarily brutal. Major Evans had gone in the opposite direction, volunteering for increasingly violent operations as if trying to prove something to himself. "I've become the kind of person I used to arrest," Morrison confided to Lieutenant Chen during a conversation that Kethvar overheard. "When this war started, I had principles. Lines I wouldn't cross. Now I can't even remember what those lines were supposed to be." Chen's response was equally disturbing. "Maybe that's what it takes to win. Maybe the people we used to be weren't strong enough to protect the people we love." Dr. Stone had begun showing signs of severe psychological breakdown. Her torture sessions had become erratic and unfocused, as if she was conducting them more for her own satisfaction than for any intelligence value. Several junior officers had requested transfers rather than work with her, and even General Martinez was becoming concerned about her methods. "She's lost perspective," Martinez told Admiral Parker during a private meeting. "The psychological techniques are supposed to gather intelligence, not satisfy personal sadism. Stone is becoming a liability." Parker's solution was typically direct. "Transfer her to the Biological Weapons Project. Let Dr. Walsh keep an eye on her. We can't afford to lose useful personnel just because they're enjoying their work too much." But it was Lieutenant Clark who gave Kethavar the most important piece of information. During another midnight visit, Clark revealed that some human officers were actively working to sabotage their own military operations. "Commander Turner's Special Forces unit has been feeding false intelligence to the fleet," Clark whispered. "He's been protecting Zephyrian civilian evacuation routes while reporting them as secured. Several transport ships have escaped because Turner deliberately gave them wrong coordinates to intercept points." The revelation that some humans were actively working against their own military came as a shock to Kethavar. These people were risking court-martial and execution to protect enemy civilians they had never met. "Why?" Kethavar asked. Clark was quiet for a long moment. "Because some things are more important than winning. Turner lost his entire family in the first Zephyrian attack, but he says that doesn't give him the right to kill innocent people in return. He says someone has to remember what we're supposed to be fighting for." The breaking point came when Admiral Parker announced her final solution to the Zephyrian problem. Planet-killer weapons would be deployed against every major Zephyrian world simultaneously, wiping out billions of civilians in a matter of hours. The operation was scheduled to begin in 72 hours, but instead of celebration, the announcement triggered a mutiny among the human forces. Nearly half of the officer corps refused to participate in what they called genocide, and several key personnel began actively sabotaging the weapons systems. "This is not what humanity stands for," Captain Morrison announced during a heated meeting with Admiral Parker. "We may be capable of this level of destruction, but that doesn't mean we should use it." Parker's response was cold and final. "The Zephyrian Empire would do the same to us if our positions were reversed. This is war, not a philosophy debate." "Then maybe we've already lost," Morrison replied. "Maybe becoming the kind of people who commit genocide means that victory isn't worth having." The base erupted into chaos as human fought human over the question of how far they were willing to go to win the war. Kethavar watched from his cell as the same people, who had tortured and murdered his crew members, now turned their weapons on each other in defense of principles they had thought were lost. Professor Rodriguez and her historical record project had documented every human war crime in excruciating detail, creating an archive that would condemn their own species for generations to come. But they had also documented the resistance, the officers who had refused orders, the soldiers who had risked everything to protect enemy civilians. "Future historians will have the complete picture," Rodriguez told Kethavar during one of her interviews for the project. "They'll know that we were capable of both great evil and great courage. They'll know that some of us never stopped fighting for what we believed in, even when it meant fighting our own people." As Kethavar made his recordings that night, documenting the civil war breaking out among his captors, he realized that his understanding of humanity had been completely wrong. These people were not monsters. They were something far more complex and dangerous. A species capable of both absolute evil and absolute good, often within the same individual. The question was not whether humans were evil. The mutiny aboard the human base reached its climax when Captain Morrison placed Admiral Parker under arrest for war crimes. The old admiral did not resist as Marines loyal to Morrison secured her weapons and escorted her to a holding cell. But her final words echoed through the command center like a curse. "You think you're saving humanity's soul," Parker said to Morrison as the restraints were placed on her wrists. "But when the Zephyrian Empire regroups and comes back with twice as many ships, remember that your conscience got a lot of good people killed." The human forces split into 3 factions almost immediately. Morrison led those who wanted to fight the war according to traditional rules of engagement, treating prisoners humanely and avoiding civilian targets. A smaller group under Major Evans believed that total warfare was the only way to ensure human survival, and they began planning their own genocide mission using stolen planet-killer weapons. The largest group, led by Professor Rodriguez, wanted to end the fighting entirely through negotiated surrender. But the decision was taken out of their hands when the Zephyrian Empire made a crucial mistake. Intercepted communications revealed that High Command had authorized the use of viral weapons against human colony worlds, biological agents specifically designed to target human DNA and leave the infrastructure intact for Zephyrian occupation. The revelation that his own people were planning genocide changed everything for Kethvar. As he listened to the decoded transmissions, he realized that the Zephyrian Empire was no different from the humans when faced with a losing war. They were willing to commit the same atrocities, use the same justifications, abandon the same principles in the name of victory. Lieutenant Clark brought him the news personally, his young face full of bitter disappointment. "Your people aren't any better than us," Clark said quietly. When they thought they were winning, they talked about honor and civilization. Now that they're losing, they're planning to kill billions of innocent humans. Captain Sam Mitchell arrived at the base 3 days later, as an official representative of the Earth government, carrying authorization to negotiate an immediate ceasefire. He was a career diplomat who had spent his life preventing wars rather than fighting them, and he brought with him a proposal that surprised everyone. "Both sides have committed atrocities," Mitchell announced to a joint assembly of human and Zephyrian representatives via quantum communication. "Both sides have abandoned the principles they claimed to be fighting for. Both sides are planning genocidal attacks against civilian populations. This war has revealed the worst aspects of both our species." The proposal was simple but radical. Instead of one side surrendering to the other, both sides would surrender to an independent tribunal made up of neutral alien species. Human and Zephyrian war criminals would be tried together, and both governments would accept oversight from the galactic community to prevent future conflicts. Admiral Parker, speaking from her cell, rejected the proposal immediately. "We don't need alien oversight," she declared. "Humanity can police itself." But Captain Morrison disagreed. "Can we? Look what we've become in just 2 months of fighting. Look what we were willing to do to win. Maybe we do need someone watching over us." The most important voice in the debate came from an unexpected source. Kethvar had been asked to testify about his experiences as a prisoner of war, and everyone expected him to condemn humanity as irredeemably evil, based on everything he had witnessed and recorded. Instead, he did something that shocked both sides. "I came here to document human cruelty," Kethvar said, standing before the joint assembly with his recording device in his hands. "I have 47 hours of footage showing human soldiers committing acts that violate every principle of civilized warfare. Torture, murder, biological experimentation, psychological warfare designed to break the minds of prisoners." He paused, looking at the faces of his former captors, Morrison, Chen, Brooks, Walsh, Stone, all the humans who had participated in his torment over the past 2 months. "But I also have recordings of humans risking their careers and their lives to protect Zephyrian civilians. I have footage of human soldiers crying after following orders they found morally repugnant. I have evidence of an entire faction of the human military attempting to prevent genocide against my people." Kethvar activated his recording device and played a transmission that had been intercepted just that morning. It was a Zephyrian fleet commander discussing the best methods for deploying viral weapons against human population centers, talking about the elimination of human children with the same casual tone that Dr. Stone had once used to discuss Zephyrian psychology. "My people are planning exactly the same atrocities that I have documented among the humans," Kethvar continued. "The only difference is that the humans are already putting their own war criminals on trial, while my people are still planning new ways to commit mass murder." The testimony that followed was unlike anything in the history of interstellar diplomacy. Kethvar presented evidence not just of human war crimes, but of Zephyrian atrocities committed on other conquered worlds. He had accessed his people's classified military archives during his intelligence training, and he knew about the civilian populations that had been systematically eliminated during previous Zephyrian expansion campaigns. "We call ourselves a warrior culture," Kethvar said, his voice heavy with shame. "We speak of honor and nobility in battle, but when I review the historical records, I see that we have committed genocide against 17 different species over the past 3 centuries. We have enslaved entire populations, experimented on prisoner populations, and wiped out civilizations that refused to surrender quickly enough." Captain Morrison looked stunned. "You're saying your people have done this before?" "We have done worse," Kethvar replied. "The humans tortured and killed dozens of my people. My people have exterminated billions. The difference is that humans seem capable of feeling guilt about their actions. Dr. Stone, who had been released from psychiatric care to testify about her interrogation methods, broke down completely during her testimony. "I became addicted to the power," she admitted through tears. "Every time I broke another prisoner, every time I found a new way to cause psychological pain, I felt like I was accomplishing something important. But I was just feeding a sickness inside myself." The most powerful testimony came from Sergeant Brooks, who had been responsible for executing dozens of Zephyrian prisoners. "I followed orders because I thought that was what soldiers were supposed to do," he said, his scarred hands shaking as he spoke. "But every night I see their faces. Every night I remember how they looked at me before I pulled the trigger. Orders don't make it right. Nothing makes it right." But the human who surprised Cathvar the most was Captain Morrison himself. The man who had authorized so many atrocities, who had turned a mining colony into a center for war crimes, stood before the tribunal and accepted full responsibility for everything that had happened under his command. "I told myself that I was protecting humanity," Morrison said. "I told myself that extreme measures were necessary for survival. But the truth is that I was scared, and I let that fear turn me into someone I don't recognize. If this tribunal decides that I should be executed for war crimes, I won't resist that judgment." The final decision came after 3 days of deliberation. Both sides would accept an immediate ceasefire and submit to the jurisdiction of the Galactic Tribunal for War Crimes. Human and Zephyrian officers who had participated in atrocities would be tried together, and both species would accept permanent monitoring to prevent future conflicts. Most importantly, both governments agreed to establish the Morrison Protocol, named after the human captain, who had volunteered to stand trial for his crimes. The protocol established strict rules of engagement for interstellar warfare, with severe penalties for targeting civilian populations or using biological weapons against any species. Admiral Parker was among the first to be tried by the tribunal, charged with planning genocide against Zephyrian civilians. She was sentenced to life imprisonment on a neutral world, where she would spend her remaining years, documenting the psychological factors that led military officers to abandon their moral principles during wartime. Dr. Stone and several other human personnel were sentenced to mandatory psychological treatment and community service, working to rehabilitate war trauma victims from both species. Major Evans chose to plead guilty to all charges and was sentenced to death, a penalty he accepted without appeal. But the most significant outcome was not the punishment of war criminals, but the establishment of joint human-Zephyrian institutions designed to prevent future conflicts. Cultural exchange programs, joint military exercises, shared research projects, and most importantly, mandatory education about the war crimes committed by both sides. Cathvar became the first director of the War Crimes Memorial Institute, using his recordings and testimony to teach future generations about what happens when civilized species abandon their principles in pursuit of victory. The Institute's mission statement was simple: never again, for anyone. In his final recording, made 5 years after the end of the war, Cathvar reflected on everything he had learned about humanity and his own people.